Hey guys, and welcome back to another Brave 9 video. This one is just me continuing from the previous Novice Arena tier list video. So we have defenders. Before I begin though, in case you haven't seen the first one, I'm just gonna repeat a point that I mentioned there that I think is too important for me to miss out. And that is, even if mercenaries are not in this tier list, they are by no means bad. It just means that they're currently not really a great fit for the meta, but you can fully expect them to join in at any point of time really, because new strategies always come up, new formations always come up, so I will highly recommend that you keep one copy of every single mercenary, 3-star and 4-star, plus 9 them. You don't have to rank them up if you don't want to, but at least have them at plus 9 so that they're ready to go if they're ever needed. That being said, if you've invested in a mercenary that's not in the tier list, that's fine. I guarantee that you will eventually use them at some point, so don't worry too much about it, but you might also want to start looking at some mercenaries in the tier list, because I do still think that they'll be pretty relevant for a long time. Okay, so with defenders, we have two traits in my opinion that really separate all of them. The first one being whether the defender has taunt or not. That's going to play a huge factor in deciding where you're going to place your defenders. Typically for defenders with taunt, such as Carlson, Mercedes, Horan, Iris, Bellasier, you would place them in an area where you don't have any tiles behind them. I mean, either you don't have any tiles behind them or the tiles behind them are empty. That's because once they have taunt, they're going to get hits from warriors like Thalos, Cordelia, Richnet, who all have a pretty big range horizontally. And then there's also Scarlet and Riddell and those kind of things who attack tiles vertically as well. So if you place a taunt, usually you'll have to think about who is most likely to hit them, and then you can place them in an area where you don't drag other mercenaries into the attack as well. The second trait of defenders that I think is pretty important when it comes to considering your turn order and where you place them is whether they are reflective defenders or not. So Carlson is an example of a non-reflective defender. Even if you attack Carlson, nothing's gonna happen to you. Whereas for Sloan, Mercedes, Horan, Iris, Bellasier, these are defenders which reflect, and more particularly actually, it's Sloan, Mercedes, and Horan, because usually if you attack them, you will get one-shotted, unless you're attacking with a defender, but otherwise, for warriors and magicians, they'll most likely die to them. Iris and Bellasier are also reflective, but just in a different way. You'll get charmed by Iris if you attack her, but you can easily remove that with Serendia's Purify. You can also get a stigma from Bellasier, which you can't really remove, otherwise you'll get your HP taken away, but she's just not the type of one-shot reflective defenders like Sloan, Mercedes, and Horan. Also, if you don't run Serendia with Purify or other mercenaries who have Purify, then Bellasier is going to have her effects severely reduced, and yeah, you're just not going to one-shot anyone. But with Sloan, Mercedes, and Horan, it's pretty much guaranteed. Alright, so that's all the general stuff that I have to say. Let's start off with Carlson. Carlson is one of the main characters in the story. He's one of the first units that you get, probably actually one of the starting units that you get even. And he seems pretty bad in everything, especially without taunt. He gets his taunt at plus 12, but boy, when he's plus 15, he's actually extremely tanky. I've seen Carlson tank the likes of Richnet, Beatrice not getting one-shotted as well, probably because Carlson is immune to DOT. He has reduced incoming damage. You would ruin him defense because he does damage based on defense times attack. So yeah, even though Carlson's a 3-star unit, nothing flashy, he is actually pretty tanky and he can actually deal a bit of damage as well, especially if you give him several buffs from Serendia. You're likely not going to give him 2 buffs because that would involve mixing him in with your other warriors in close proximity, which you don't want, right? Talking again about taunts, you generally don't want to put them in places where it's close to your other warriors and magicians and stuff, because they'll get caught up in the attack range as well. But sometimes you can run him with like 1 buff from Serendia because her range is pretty big, 3x3. And he will actually be able to one-shot the likes of Ebony and sometimes Mercedes. So yeah, Carlson's really good, and a lot of people use him in Challenger. He's just a really good unit. Next we have Sloan. A lot of people use him as well. Personally, Sloan, again, like some other warriors, I haven't invested in every single mercenary. So Sloan is one of them that I haven't really gone around to try out. I have him 5-starred, but just not really built enough for me to use. But Sloan is actually particularly annoying because when warriors attack Sloan, warriors and magicians, they'll get their HP taken off. Actually, magicians not as much, but for warriors it deals triple poison damage, which pretty much kills every single warrior, be it Riddell or Richnet, or Thalos, Naja. For most warriors, Sloan will one-shot them because warriors have high attack, and he deals poison damage to them based off their attack. The only thing about Sloan is that he does not have taunt, so he's a bit trickier to use in that sense. You can't just place him anywhere. You have to make sure he's in a place where warriors are gonna hit him, and hit him ahead of your other mercenaries. Sloan also deals pretty okay damage. It's not really all that high, but it's not that insignificant and low either. Like Mercedes, Iris, and Bellasier, their attack is actually really low. But Sloan does deal some pretty decent damage. He should be able to 2-shot a warrior, which yeah, Mercedes, Iris, and Bellasier won't be able to do. Overall, pretty solid unit. Next up, we have Mercedes. Mercedes is really useful. Man, like, so Mercedes has taunt, and she also has reflective counter based on incoming damage. That's actually really good. When it comes to reflecting against warriors, in a way Mercedes' reflective counter is more consistent than Horan, because if you think about it, Mercedes with her reflective counter that deals damage based on incoming damage, warriors are going to hit her for a lot, and if you rune Mercedes for HP, you're gonna get about 7,000 HP on Mercedes, and if a warrior wants to kill her, then they have to deal that amount of damage as well. And reflecting based off incoming damage, all the damage is going to be reflected back to the warrior, which means the warrior is probably going to die. Mercedes can actually quite successfully counter Scarlet. I'm not too sure about a Scarlet that's set up really well, because I have seen cases where Scarlet does not die to Mercedes' reflect, but it does happen pretty frequently as well. Other warriors like Thalos, Richnet, Naja, all of them can't survive Mercedes. The only ones who can are, I guess, units that don't have really high attack. So for example, if Iris or Bellasier hits Mercedes, they're not going to take much damage because they don't deal much damage to her either. And that is where Horan is different. They're good for different scenarios. For Horan, her reflective damage is based off her own attack. So you can actually buff her with 2 buffs and get her attack up really high. This is usually pretty damn good because that's typically enough to take out almost every warrior. Horan will be able to successfully reflect damage and kill Riddell, Richnet, Thalos, Naja, etc. But she will not be able to kill Scarlet because she doesn't deal damage based off incoming damage, which means that she will get her attack stat significantly lowered because of Scarlet's skill, and she won't be able to reflect as much damage since her damage is based off her attack. So Horan has a weakness that is Scarlet, but it's also good against defenders like Iris and Bellasier, Carlson hitting her. They will get reflected for quite a huge amount, other Horans and Mercedes included. Whereas for Mercedes, it's just not really the case because if you deal little damage to Mercedes, she's just not going to reflect it. Whereas for Horan, if you don't deal a lot of damage, she's still going to reflect back the same amount of damage. Horan is also good in the fact that if you double buff her especially, her damage can actually be pretty high. I've seen my Horan deal 8,000, 11,000 damage when she attacks because I have her on double plus 15 buffs from Serendia and Ebony, and I rune her 2 attack runes as well. So yeah, Horan is actually pretty dope. And to be fair, if I had to select a defender who I think dominates the Novice Arena the most out of this list, it would probably be Horan. Moving on to the 4-star defenders, we have Iris. Iris, I'm sure all of you guys know, her charm has 2 layers. I'm not sure when she gets it, is it plus 12? But yeah, she's extremely good because of that. Can you imagine Iris used to hit 1 tile and didn't used to have 2 layers of charm as well? Man, but Iris now with 5 tiles with skip, hitting in an X formation with 2 layers of charm, wow. Iris is actually really strong. She has DOT immunity as well. She also gets a lot of additional defense if the enemy that she has charmed dies, if I'm not wrong. So she can easily reach 100% defense with just 1 shield rune. Otherwise, you can grant her with quite a bit of HP, making her extremely tanky. I've seen Maria with 1 buff fail to take out my Iris. So yeah, Iris is extremely tanky. She brings about a lot of utility. And for a 4-star, I really should say she's really worth using. Really worth taking up one of your 4-star slots to use. She's just overall great. Typically, mercenaries can't really deal with her 2-layer charm unless you run 2 supporters that can sort of purify, I guess. You can use Julie plus Serendia to do that, but it's kind of a waste of space if you're just putting Julie in there. Serendia, obviously, she's a great supporter anyway, but if you throw in Julie just for the sake of that, it might be a bit of a waste of space. But I have noticed something pretty strange, and I don't yet know how it works. If you run Ebony with Serendia, and Ebony goes before Serendia, then the mercenaries that have been buffed by Ebony and then buffed again by Serendia have their charm completely removed. Both layers of charm will be removed. I have no idea why that's the case, but it's one of the counters against Iris, and honestly, it's a really strong counter. Iris is essentially rendered useless if you can get rid of her double charm. So yeah, I don't really know why that happens, but that's just the case. Oh wait! Oh, I know how it works now! Right, so the way Iris's double layer charm works is that she actually does a charm, a regular charm, and then, well actually not regular, but she has the first layer of charm, which is the one in bright pink, and then when that charm expires, the mercenary then gets charmed again, so with the regular charm this time, like the ones that you see from Mia. So that's how it works. So if you do Ebony and then Serendia, you're essentially giving your mercenaries attack interference immunity, basically immunity to charm, and then using Purify from Serendia, you're going to remove the first layer of charm, and the second layer of charm cannot be activated because your mercenaries are attack interference immune. Whoa, that's so cool. I can't believe I only figured it out now, but yeah, so that's, anyway, as I was saying, that's a really strong counter towards Iris, having Ebony move before Serendia, and in that case, I guess you don't really need Ebony. You can use anything with attack interference immunity, and it will work. So yeah, that's one of the counters towards Iris. If you're struggling, you can either do that. So when you're attacking, you have the first move. You can then straight away just use your attack interference immunity, so the opponent Iris can't charm you. But if you're defending, then it's important to use that attack interference plus purify combo, because when you're defending, you don't have the first turn. The opponent Iris is going to charm you first, so you have to then safely remove the charm. That's the difference. Okay, I feel like I've talked a long time about Iris, so let's move on to Bellasier. So Bellasier was a 4-star that got her plus 15 before Iris. She was really the first 4-star defender to come in and just dominate the meta, I believe. The first time I ever got into Novice Arena Challenger, I think I never even ranked in Grandmaster before. I was in Master, and when Bellasier came along, I was like, yo, that's the cool shit right there. And I got Bellasier and came up with information and actually got into Challenger rank 6 for the first time. And yeah, it was all due to Bellasier. So why is Bellasier so strong? Well, first of all, she's pretty damn tanky. She has stats weakening, so any mercenary that attacks her will be cursed unless they are immune to stats weakening. So if you do want to kill Bellasier, it's not going to be enough to just use one Serendia's buff. You do need some sort of stats weakening buff. That's really important. Bellasier, especially if you pair her up with Lulu, oh boy, she's so hard to kill. She also gets additional defense on killing enemies with Stigma, and Bellasier also hits in the skip plus tile range, which is quite huge, and usually, especially in a meta where Serendia is everywhere, Bellasier is a pretty good counter if you can set her up right. A lot of people intentionally do not use Serendia just so they won't suffer the effects of Bellasier. So yeah, Bellasier is pretty cool. Tanky, can deal damage in the form of Stigma, but do note that if you're using Bellasier and you're facing a team that does not play Serendia or any other supporter with Purify, then your Bellasier is going to have her effects significantly reduced, because her true value really is when the Stigma gets removed by Purify by your opponent without you having to attack them a second time. Okay, so that does it for the first tier. Let's move on to the second one, which we only have one, and that is Ayan. Ayan came up, I think, shortly before Bellasier, and Ayan is pretty cool actually. She hits in a skip plus tile range like Bellasier, but she's a defender that does DOT damage, so she essentially functions like a warrior actually. She deals damage, that's her primary role. She can't really tank all that much. She can reach 100% defense though, if she manages to kill an enemy, but she does not have taunt. So basically, if you want to use her as a proper defender for enemies to attack her while she has 100% defense, you will have to place her in a place where, well, people are going to hit typically. But then again, if you're gonna do that, then you wouldn't want other mercenaries around her, which is kind of impossible because Ayan needs some sort of buffs. She functions like a warrior after all. So it's kind of contradicting, and that is the only weakness of Ayan really. Back then when there weren't warriors like Scarlet and Riddell plus 15 and everything like that, then Ayan, yes, Ayan was pretty cool. Actually, I can't remember if Riddell plus 15 was a thing then, but Ayan was pretty cool for a while. Also, she had something similar to Bellasier in that when her DOT gets removed, actually I'm not sure if it's DOT or she applies some form of Stigma, some other skill, but either way, if the enemy she hits gets the status removed, then the enemy will get a chunk of HP taken off as well, just like Bellasier does. So Ayan used to be great, but right now with the existence of other warriors like Scarlet and stuff like that, that just deal way more damage. You gotta remember again, Ayan does deal damage in the form of DOT, so mercenaries like Carlson and Iris, who are DOT immune, won't really get affected all that much. Moving on down to good tier, Grace is an extremely interesting unit. She does some pretty okay damage. It's not like super low, but it's also not high. But the main reason why you'd want to use Grace is typically, it's really niche. So what Grace does is that she taunt prohibits any mercenaries who attack her. So if Carlson or Iris, Mercedes, Horan, any mercenary that would normally get a taunt on attacking, attacks her, then they're not going to get their taunt. Grace just has a skill that prohibits that. So it's really good if you're facing a lot of formations that begin the turn or have a certain taunt coming from a certain place. Like I've said in a comment from the previous video, it was a really good question by the way, asking about attackers and stuff, and I explained that basically Novice Arena is a taunting game. Because Maria exists, she's essentially Nautis with no taunt ignore. But if you can make sure that the enemy has no more taunts left before your Maria strikes on round 2, then that's pretty insane. Maria's just going to wipe out the entire row starting from the first mercenary. So taunting is extremely important in Novice Arena. It's so important, I would even call it a taunt game really. So Grace can be useful. The only problem with Grace is that, yeah, if she's situated in a place where no defenders with taunt hit her, or at least very few do, then she's not going to be all that useful, I guess. So that's why she's in this tier. She's just niche, but she can be really awesome if used right. Next up we have Mora, and Mora is the latest addition to the defenders for Novice Arena with the introduction of her plus 15. So to be honest, I haven't really looked at Mora's skills all that closely. I know that she does get 100% defense based on some conditions, but usually she doesn't really function like a normal defender, because defenders typically have taunt. She does deal quite a lot of damage, and she does get 100% defense, which makes it pretty annoying to deal with, especially if she has a supporter beside her, because she does not have immunity to attack interference. So you could charm Mora, you could stun her. If you pair her up with Serendia, then she'll essentially have 100% defense, hard hitting, gets a Purify every turn to prevent her from doing stupid stuff. So that can be pretty awesome, but typically when I've been facing Mora in Challenger, it's not that often, but when I do, it often ends up as Mora being the only one left in the opponent's board, and even if they have Serendia, I'll eventually kill off that Serendia and Mora will be left by herself, which then Richnet would really easily take care of her, because she just keeps stunning Mora and eventually 100% defense will wear off. So yeah, Mora can actually be pretty annoying to deal with. She can actually be pretty damn good, but keep in mind as well, just like Grace, they are 4-star units, so they're extremely hard to make worth using, but if you can use them right, they will be really awesome. Alright, so that's it for defenders. I was gonna say actually that defenders are even more important than the other classes, but then again, not really. I guess for Magician, maybe Magician would be the least impactful one. You're typically only going to use one Magician unless you run a Magician team, like Shoman, Maria, and Alicia. That's a possible team lineup that I've seen quite often, but other than that, usually teams only have one Magician, and that's Maria, and defenders are way more important. But then again, so are supporters and warriors, so yeah. That being said though, some people still do have the traditional thinking of, warriors are more important because they deal with damage, defenders are just not that great, supporters, it's not that showy. So there's a kind of a tendency to assume it's not as important, but for Novice Arena especially, in Brave Knight in general, but for Novice Arena especially, defenders are very, very important. Defenders are so important, I can't stress enough how essential it is to have like several really good defenders in your team. So sure, warriors are really important, but don't neglect your defenders in any way, and your supporters as well, which I'll get to.